Rigid needles approached, teeth bared, violence hung heavy. Then, a tired nurse stepped near his snarling animal, whispering one single word. Everything shattered completely. Blood soaked his heavy boots. He trusted no living soul, only his battered Belgian Malinois. White clinics always smelled of cheap bleach, stale sweat, and lies. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, emitting a low, persistent vibration that scraped against the inside of Caleb's skull. He kept his spine pressed hard against the waiting room's vinyl chair, tracking the asymmetrical rhythm of the second hand on the wall clock while mapping the 4 exits in the room. 2 were double doors leading back out into the freezing sleet. 1 led to the triage desk behind bulletproof glass. The 4th was a heavy swinging door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Caleb's right leg was stretched out stiffly in front of him. A dark, thick pool of crimson was steadily expanding across the scuffed linoleum beneath his heel. The tourniquet he had fashioned from a heavy leather belt and a socket wrench handle was biting into his thigh with a ferocious, burning pressure. But it wasn't enough. The chainsaw kicked back out at his remote cabin had bitten deep, tearing through muscle and grazing a branch of the femoral artery. He could feel the blood leaving his body, a strange, cold hollowing out of his chest, accompanied by a narrowing tunnel of gray at the edges of his vision. But Caleb didn't care about the blood. He cared about the perimeter. Pressed tightly against his uninjured left leg was Brutus. The Belgian Malinois was 75 pounds of tightly coiled muscle, scar tissue, and uncompromising loyalty. Brutus was missing half of his left ear, a souvenir from a blast in Helmand province, and carried a jagged, hairless scar across his snout. He did not look like a pet, because he wasn't one. He was a retired military working dog, a weapon of war decommissioned alongside his handler. Right now, Brutus was the only thing standing between Caleb and the perceived hostility of the civilian world. "Sir, for the final time, you need to tie the animal up outside." The voice belonged to a young triage clerk hiding behind the thick plexiglass. Her voice trembled, amplified by the small circular speaker in the glass. Caleb didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the 2 hospital security guards who had just unclipped their radios and were slowly forming a half-circle around him. They were heavy-set, breathing through their mouths, their faces flushed with a mixture of authority and sheer terror. "Dog stays," Caleb grunted. His voice sounded like grinding stones, raspy and devoid of any negotiation. The metallic taste of adrenaline coated his tongue. "It's a sterile environment, sir. And that dog is a liability," one of the guards said, resting a thick hand on the butt of his pepper spray canister. "We have patients in here. We will call animal control, and we will have the police remove him if you don't comply." Comply. The word made Caleb's jaw tighten. He shifted his weight, a microscopic adjustment, but Brutus felt it instantly. The dog's posture shifted from a rigid sit to a low, defensive crouch. Brutus didn't bark. Barking was for domestic dogs warning the mailman. Brutus emitted a sound that seemed to originate from the center of the earth, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. The dog's amber eyes locked onto the guard's hand resting on the pepper spray. The Malinois was calculating the distance, 8 feet, a split-second launch. "Take your hand off your belt," Caleb said, his voice dropping an octave. He locked eyes with the older guard. "You draw that can," he takes your arm. "You pull your taser, I break your knee before you find the trigger. Walk away." The waiting room had completely emptied out. A mother clutching a sick toddler had retreated to the far corner, watching with wide, terrified eyes. The ambient noise of the ER had flatlined, replaced entirely by the ticking clock, the hum of the lights, and the mechanical, rasping breaths escaping Caleb's teeth. The pain in his leg was a blinding white fire, but he shoved it down into a dark box in his mind, locking it away. He had operated on shattered ribs and punctured lungs before. A torn leg wouldn't stop him from defending the only living creature that understood the static in his head. We need to get him on a gurney, but we can't get near him, the triage nurse yelled into a phone, presumably to the charge nurse in the back. The dog is aggressive. Yes, I told them to call the police. Caleb closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The exhaustion was a heavy, wet blanket pulling him down. 4 years of living off the grid, avoiding crowds, avoiding noise, avoiding people. He had come down the mountain only because the blood loss was too rapid to manage with a trauma kit. Now, he was cornered in a sterile, brightly lit box, surrounded by people who looked at him like he was a monster. He moved his hand, resting his calloused palm against the coarse fur at the back of Brutus's neck. The dog leaned into the touch, the low growl never wavering. Caleb could feel the heat radiating off the animal. "Just you and me, B," Caleb whispered, the sound barely audible over the hum of the room. "Nobody touches you. I promise." The younger security guard, sweating profusely, took a half-step forward, his hand trembling as he unholstered a bright yellow taser. "Sir, I am ordering you to release the animal to the authorities." Now, Caleb's muscles coiled. His vision swam, the edges turning a fuzzy black, but his mind snapped into terrifying clarity. He mapped the trajectory. He would take the taser prongs to the chest, use the momentum to throw his weight into the younger guard, and drag him to the floor, giving Brutus the clearance to secure the older guard. It would be a mess. It would mean jail. It would mean they would put Brutus down. A heavy, crushing despair settled over Caleb's chest. He was going to lose his dog. He tightened his grip on the chair armrests, preparing to launch himself into the violence he had tried so desperately to leave behind. The heavy double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only" kicked open with a loud, hollow thud. The sound was sharp enough to make the younger guard flinch, his finger twitching nervously near the trigger of his taser. Caleb didn't blink, but his eyes darted to the doorway. A woman walked through. She didn't have the crisp, starched appearance of the daytime nursing staff. She wore faded navy blue scrubs that looked like they had been washed 100 times. A smear of something brownish red stained the hem of her top. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy, utilitarian knot, and dark bags shadowed her eyes, speaking of 12-hour graveyard shifts fueled by stale coffee and sheer spite. She smelled faintly of isopropyl alcohol, burnt espresso, and damp wool. She stopped, looking at the scene. 2 guards, weapons drawn. A man bleeding out on a vinyl chair. An 80-pound war dog ready to tear throats out. "What in the absolute hell is going on in my waiting room?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the thick tension like a scalpel. It was dry, raspy, and entirely devoid of panic. "Maya, stay back," the young doctor stammered, appearing briefly behind her before retreating behind the door frame. "Patient is hostile. Dog is aggressive. We're waiting on PD." Maya looked at the young doctor, then at the pool of blood expanding across her linoleum floor. She let out a long, exhausted sigh, the kind of sigh that only comes from someone who has seen the absolute worst of humanity and is simply too tired to be afraid of it anymore. "Dave," Maya said, her tone flat. "He's bleeding out from a femoral branch laceration. By the time PD gets here to shoot his dog, he'll be dead in my chair, and I'll be the one filling out the paperwork. Put the radio down." She stepped forward, her muddy clogs squeaking slightly on the floor. "Ma'am, stop," the younger guard barked, raising his taser slightly. Maya didn't even look at him. She slapped her hand down on the guard's wrist with a sharp, stinging smack, pushing the weapon toward the floor. "Put the plastic toy away, Gary. If you tase him, that Malinois is going to rip your face off, and I do not have the time to stitch your cheek back onto your skull tonight." Caleb watched her, his paranoia spiking. She was too calm. People were never this calm around Brutus. She walked right to the edge of the invisible perimeter Caleb had established. She stopped exactly 3 feet away, just out of striking distance, but close enough that Caleb could see the faint, silvery scar running along her jawline. Brutus shifted his stance. The growl deepened, vibrating in the dog's chest, a clear warning. The dog's amber eyes tracked Maya's hands. Maya didn't make eye contact with the dog. She knew better. Direct eye contact was a challenge. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on Caleb. She looked at his pale, sweating face, his dilated pupils, and then dropped her gaze to the improvised tourniquet. Socket wrench and a leather belt, Maya noted, her voice steady, analytical. Good windlass, but you tied it too close to the joint. It's slipping. You're losing arterial pressure. Back off, Caleb warned, his voice cracking. He tried to push himself deeper into the chair, but his strength was rapidly fading. The gray tunnel in his vision was shrinking. He felt cold. So unbelievably cold. I can't do that, Maya said plainly. She didn't use a soothing, maternal tone. She spoke to him like a mechanic, talking to a driver about a busted engine. You have about 4 minutes before you pass out. When you pass out, your grip on that dog's collar goes slack. When that happens, my guards will shoot him. If you want your dog to live, you have to let me fix your leg. It was the brutal, unvarnished truth, and it hit Caleb harder than a physical blow. The illusion of control he was clinging to shattered. She was right. If he blacked out, Brutus would defend his unconscious body to the death. Nobody takes him, Caleb gasped, his chest heaving, his fingers wrapping so tightly around Brutus's tactical harness that his knuckles turned white. I don't want your dog, Maya said, her eyes scanning Caleb's posture. She noticed the rigid, disciplined way he held himself, despite the agonizing pain. She noticed the specific brand of the tactical harness on the dog. And then, her eyes drifted to Brutus's cropped left ear. She saw the faint, faded green ink tattooed on the inside of the flap. A sequence of letters and numbers. K904NS. Maya's breath hitched, just for a fraction of a second. Her hardened expression softened, a ghost of a memory flashing behind her dark eyes. She recognized the ink. She recognized the stance. She knew exactly what kind of ghost was sitting in her waiting room. The younger guard, recovering his nerve, stepped forward again. Ma'am, I am not going to let you get bit. I have a clear shot with the taser. I swear to God, Gary, step back, Maya snapped, her voice suddenly cracking like a whip. She didn't look back at him. She dropped slowly to one knee, lowering herself so she was physically beneath Caleb's eye level. It was a deeply vulnerable position, a surrender of dominance. Caleb's heart hammered a frantic, dying rhythm against his ribs. He didn't understand what she was doing. Brutus leaned forward, his jaws parting slightly, the sharp white teeth gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The dog was a hair trigger away from violence. Maya kept her hands flat on her own thighs, palms down. She looked briefly at the dog's chest, watching the rapid, aggressive rise and fall of the animal's breathing. Then she looked up, locking her dark, exhausted eyes onto Caleb's terrified, sunken ones. She didn't plead. She didn't yell. She drew a slow, deliberate breath from her diaphragm, channeling a voice that belonged to a different life, a different time. A voice of absolute, calm authority. Belay. The word hung in the sterile air, sharp and quiet. Brutus's jaws snapped shut with an audible click. The terrifying, rumbling growl cut off instantly, as if a switch had been flipped inside the dog's brain. The Malinois blinked, the aggressive tension melting from his muscles in a fraction of a second. He broke his defensive stance, immediately pivoting to look at Caleb's face, his tail tucking neatly around his paws as he dropped into a perfect, disciplined sit. He let out a soft, confused whine, waiting for his handler to confirm the command. Caleb froze. The cold sweat on the back of his neck turned to ice. His lungs stopped pulling air. The chaotic buzzing of the hospital waiting room completely faded away, leaving only the ringing in his ears. He stared at the exhausted nurse kneeling in front of him. His walls, constructed from years of paranoia, trauma, and isolation, fractured violently. He looked at her not as a threat, but as an impossible anomaly. How did she know? The word belay did not belong in a civilian emergency room. It belonged in dust-choked compounds and the deafening roar of rotor wash. It was a kill switch command, trained into the highest tier of working dogs to instantly break prey drive and cease aggression. Caleb's grip on the heavy leather leash slackened. The thick fog of blood loss and adrenaline parted just enough for a profound, disorienting shock to bleed through. He watched Brutus. The Malinois was completely still, his dark muzzle closed, his amber eyes fixed on the exhausted nurse, kneeling on the scuffed linoleum. Maya did not celebrate the small victory. She didn't offer a reassuring smile. She moved, sliding her knees across the floor, indifferent to the pooling blood soaking through the thin fabric of her scrub pants. She closed the final 3 feet between them. Caleb's hand twitched, a dying reflex to defend his space, but his arm felt like it was packed with wet sand. He couldn't raise it. "Don't fight me," Maya said. It wasn't a request. She reached his leg. Her hands were incredibly fast, completely devoid of the trembling hesitation the security guards had shown. She didn't fumble with the socket wrench. She bypassed it entirely. Reaching into the deep cargo pocket of her scrub pants, she produced a black, military-grade combat application tourniquet. A cat. Caleb recognized the dull snap of the Velcro. It was a sound he had heard in his nightmares for 4 years. "This is going to burn," she warned, sliding the thick black strap high up on his thigh, inches above the laceration. She yanked the tail tight with a sharp, violent pull. Caleb choked on a ragged breath. The pain was absolute. It sheared through his remaining defenses, a blinding spike of white-hot agony that forced a harsh, guttural sound from his throat. He threw his head back against the vinyl chair, his teeth grinding together so hard his jaw popped. Brutus whined, breaking his sit to press his wet nose against Caleb's good knee, anxious and confused by the sudden spike in his handler's distress. "Leave it," Maya said sharply to the dog, not looking up as she twisted the plastic windlass rod of the tourniquet. "Sit." Brutus sat. He hated it, his ears pinned flat against his skull, but he obeyed the voice of authority. "Gary, put the damn taser away and get a gurney over here right now." Maya barked over her shoulder, securing the rod into the plastic clip. The bleeding, which had been a steady, terrifying pulse, slowed to a sluggish ooze. "Dave, page Dr. Aris. Tell him I need Trauma Bay 3 prepped." "Let's move." The room unfroze. The squeal of rubber wheels on linoleum cut through the tense silence. Caleb felt rough hands grabbing his shoulders, sliding him from the rigid waiting room chair onto the firm mattress of the gurney. The transition was agonizing. His vision grayed out completely for a span of 5 seconds, a rushing sound filling his ears like ocean surf. When his sight returned, he was staring at the acoustic ceiling tiles, passing by in a blur. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead in a rhythmic, nauseating sequence. "My dog," Caleb slurred, panic rising in his chest again. His hand groped blindly off the edge of the gurney, grasping at empty air. "He's right here." Maya's voice was close. He felt a heavy, coarse canvas strap pressed into his palm. It was the end of Brutus's leash. "Hold on to it. I've got the middle. He walks with me." Caleb turned his head slightly. Maya was walking briskly beside the gurney, her hand firmly wrapped around the center of the leash, holding Brutus in a tight heel. The Malinois trotted silently beside the moving bed, ignoring the shouting staff, the beeping monitors, and the overwhelming smells of the hospital. He kept his eyes locked on Maya's pacing legs, recognizing her as the temporary handler. They crashed through a set of heavy swinging doors. The air changed. It was significantly colder here, smelling sharply of iodine, metallic rust, and rubbing alcohol. "On 3, a male voice shouted. Caleb felt himself being lifted and dropped onto a cold steel trauma table. The jar sent fresh waves of nausea rolling through his stomach. Overhead, a massive array of surgical lights clicked on, blindingly bright. "BP is tanking, 80 over 50, someone called out. "Get a large bore IV in the right antecubital. Hang a liter of saline, wide open," Maya directed. Someone grabbed Caleb's right arm, a harsh scrub of alcohol, then the sharp bite of a thick needle sliding into his vein. He shivered violently. Hypovolemic shock was setting in, stripping the heat from his core. His teeth chattered. A humiliating, uncontrollable clicking sound in the chaotic room. A heavy, heated blanket was thrown over his chest, the weight of it pressing down on his ribs. He felt the heavy denim of his work pants being cut away, the thick fabric giving way to the tearing sound of heavy-duty trauma shears. He tried to sit up, to check his perimeter, to find Brutus. A firm, gloved hand pressed flat against his sternum, pushing him back down. "Look at the ceiling," Maya ordered. She was leaning over him now, a surgical mask pulled up over her nose, leaving only her dark, exhausted eyes visible. The harsh overhead light caught the silver scar on her jawline. "Your dog is sitting in the corner. He's safe. You're safe. Stop fighting the room." Caleb stared into her eyes. He searched for pity, for the condescending sympathy that usually drove him out of towns and back up into the mountains. He found none. He found only the cold, hard competence of someone who lived in the trenches of human suffering. His muscles finally gave out. The sheer exhaustion broke through the dam of his paranoia. His head lolled to the side. Through the chaotic movement of green-scrubbed bodies rushing around the table, he saw Brutus. The dog was tucked into the corner of the trauma bay, sitting perfectly upright, guarding the door. Caleb closed his eyes, surrendering to the bitter cold. The chaotic noise had completely faded, replaced by the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the quiet hiss of forced air from the ventilation vent. Caleb opened his eyes. The blinding overhead lights had been angled away. The room was dim, the atmosphere heavy and still. The oppressive, freezing chill of shock had subsided, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He was alone in the trauma bay, except for the nurse. Maya was sitting on a low, rolling stool at the foot of the bed. She had discarded the bloody scrub top, replacing it with a clean, oversized gray fleece jacket. The surgical mask was pulled down around her neck. She held a curved suture needle in a pair of heavy forceps, pulling a clear, thick thread through his skin with mechanical precision. Caleb felt nothing in his leg. The local anesthetic had completely deadened the torn flesh, leaving only a strange, distant sensation of tugging and pulling. He shifted his head. Beside the bed, curled into a tight ball on the cold tile floor, was Brutus. The dog was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a deep, even rhythm. Caleb watched the nurse work. He watched the way her hands moved, efficient, economical, wasting no energy. Her knuckles were bruised, the skin dry and cracked from endless hand-washing. "You're awake," she stated flatly, not looking up from his thigh. She tied off a knot, the forceps clicking softly against the steel tray beside her. "Your pressure is stable. You need 2 units of whole blood, but you refused it on your intake paperwork. So, you're getting iron supplements and saline. You'll feel like you were hit by a cement truck for the next week." Caleb didn't care about the blood. He swallowed hard, trying to clear the sand from his throat. His voice came out as a weak, raspy scrape. "Where?" Maya paused. She snipped the end of the suture thread with a pair of small scissors. She didn't pretend to misunderstand the question. She dropped the tools onto the metal tray, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She leaned back on her stool, rolling her shoulders to work out a stiff kink in her neck. She looked at Caleb, her dark eyes scanning his weathered face, the deep lines around his eyes, the tense set of his jaw. "Roll 3 Hospital, Kandahar Airfield," Maya said quietly. Her voice lacked any dramatic weight. It was simply a statement of geographical fact. 2010 to 2014. Forward surgical team. Caleb's breath caught. He stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly clicking together, the calm under pressure, the complete lack of fear around a working dog, the scarred hands, the way she had applied the tourniquet. "You were a trauma nurse," Caleb murmured. "I patched up 19-year-old kids who stepped on things they shouldn't have," Maya corrected, reaching for a fresh alcohol swab to clean the edges of the sutured wound. And occasionally, I patched up the guys who went out at night, wearing night vision. You guys always broke the best equipment. Caleb closed his eyes. The memory of the dust, the smell of burning diesel, and the chaotic roar of the medevac choppers threatened to pull him under. He forced it down. And the dogs? He asked, opening his eyes to look at Brutus. The handlers were worse than the dogs, Maya said, a tiny, humorless smirk briefly touching the corner of her mouth. A guy would come in with a shredded shoulder and try to fight the anesthesiologist because he wouldn't let go of his dog's leash. Sound familiar? Caleb felt a hot, uncomfortable flush crawl up his neck. He looked away, staring at the blank hospital wall. I don't trust civilians. Civilian is a state of mind, Maya replied, applying a thick white pressure dressing over the angry red line of stitches. She taped it down with smooth, firm strokes. Most people in this building think blood is a biohazard. Some of us know it's just the price of doing business. She stood up, pushing the rolling stool away with her heel. She walked over to the corner of the room, crouching down beside the sleeping Malinois. Brutus cracked one amber eye open. He didn't growl. He simply watched her. Maya extended the back of her hand, keeping her fingers curled, letting the dog sniff her knuckles. Brutus exhaled a long breath, recognizing the smell of the woman who had taken control, the woman who had not flinched. He rested his heavy head back down on his paws, accepting her presence in his handler's space. He's a good boy, Maya said softly, her thumb brushing briefly against the soft fur behind the dog's good ear. NS, Naval Special Warfare. He earned his retirement. She stood up, walking back to the side of Caleb's bed. She looked down at him. The aggressive, paranoid man who had held her waiting room hostage was gone. In his place was a severely dehydrated, exhausted ghost holding on to the remnants of a war that had ended years ago. You can't keep living on a hair trigger, Maya said, her tone dropping the clinical detachment for the first time. I know the mountains are quiet, but out there, you're your own backup. Today, you bled out over a chainsaw kickback. Next time, it might be a broken ankle in a blizzard. You die out there. The state takes the dog. You understand me? Caleb looked at her. He hated that she was right. He hated the vulnerability of it. But for the first time in 4 years, the overwhelming urge to run, to escape the perimeter, was gone. I understand, Caleb rasped. Maya nodded once. Good. Dr. Eris is going to admit you overnight for observation. If you try to sign out against medical advice, I will call animal control, and I will have Gary tase you on your way out the door. It was a threat, but there was no venom in it. It was an anchor. Maya, Caleb said, his voice quiet, finally using her name. She stopped with her hand on the curtain, separating the trauma bay from the rest of the ER. She looked back at him over her shoulder. Thanks. Maya didn't smile. She just gave him a tired, acknowledging nod. Get some sleep, sailor. She pulled back the heavy curtain and walked back out into the chaotic noise of the emergency room, leaving Caleb alone in the quiet dark, the heavy weight of his dog pressing warmly against his uninjured leg. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, in a very long time, he didn't listen for footsteps approaching the door. He just slept. If this story struck a nerve, leave a like and subscribe. We explore raw, deeply human moments where survival meets vulnerability. What did you think of Caleb and Maya's intense hospital standoff? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe shared trauma can instantly break down years of built-up walls? Share this video with someone who understands the unbreakable bond between a veteran and their dog. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling chapter.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Williams, the owner and manager of Second Ember Reborn. After watching the video, retired SEAL trusted nobody and guarded his dog. Until the nurse spoke one word, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, the strongest emotion was trust. Caleb had built walls around himself and relied on only one companion, yet a single moment of understanding changed everything. What stood out wasn't just the emergency itself, but the way Maya recognized what others missed and met him with respect instead of fear. One gentle lesson from this story is that real connection often starts when someone feels seen and understood. Have you ever had a moment when one simple word or act of kindness changed your view of someone? And what part of Caleb and Brutus's journeys stayed with you the most? If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like or subscribe for more.